Hello and welcome to episode 176 of Section 138. I'm your host, Mark Colley, as always, joined by Bryson and Jacob. And guys, normally I ask how you're doing, but every week since the lockout has started, every time I ask that, we end up talking about the lockout. So instead of that, I'm going to wish all you guys a happy new year. It's 2022, our first episode of 2022, but I'm also going to ask you what your New Year's resolution is. If you have one, if you have multiple, what is your New Year's resolution?
Well, first of all, I think I'm going to go back to what you said in one of our group chats a couple of weeks ago. Thank goodness there is no baseball going on right now due to the current state of the world. So that I'm happy for at the same time, just because it's been a tough, I guess, couple of weeks here, especially in Ontario for where Jacob and I are, and you as well during school. But my New Year's resolution, I think it was, is unfortunately, I don't want to sound like Jacob, but I think it was a Blue Jays World Series in 2022.
See, I'm gonna be honest. I forgot to make a New Year's resolution. I don't know why, but I think the biggest thing is I need to go to a home opener. Like what? I don't care what team it is. I want to
That's
see
easy.
one. Well, yeah, I'd like it to be the Blue Jays because I've been wanting to go for like a decade now. But I want to at least go to one of them. I don't care if I miss school or miss anything. I just want to see one type of home opener because it's always probably my favorite game of the year.
I still can't believe you've never been to a Jays home opener.
That's insane.
I know I've been wanting to for so long, but now I finally am able to go, at least without any like adult supervision. So I'm definitely going to be making the trip down for one of those.
Okay. Well, we'll be waiting eagerly to hear whether you go, and hopefully we can all make it to one, assuming everything works out in the world before we actually get to the point of the Blue Jays home opener. But for me, I guess a little bit different than you guys. I enjoy making New Year's resolutions, so I have a whole list of things I want to do this year. There's a bunch. Some of them are about baseball, some about the podcast. For one of them, I run every day. I normally run 5K, but I'd like to run a little bit more because I've been running 5K for quite a while. So this year, my resolution is to hit 2,000 kilometers total, which works out to about 5.5K every day. So we'll see how that goes. And then, of course, I'd like to go to Blue Jay games. Of course, that's always on the resolution list. And yeah, at risk of sounding like Jacob, Blue Jays World Series. So yeah, after having that intro to try to avoid repeating ourselves with the lockout, we end up repeating ourselves with the Blue Jays World Series talk. But we will move on to our first topic of today. We had to scrounge for topics, but Kyle Seager has retired officially. He announced it, or his wife announced it on Twitter. And Blue Jays, I don't know if we ever heard if they had explicitly had interest in him, but he was always a name that could work out for them. Kind of an infielder, a guy who, yeah, he's older, but he fills some of the needs of the Blue Jays. And he's a left-handed bat. He can add that depth off the bench. He can start a couple days. It fit all the check boxes of what the Blue Jays were needing, even though it wasn't kind of that high impact player, high impact bat the Blue Jays wanted. He's off the market now, given that he's retired, but it's a question of whether he would have been a good fit for the Blue Jays in the first place. Personally, I wouldn't have been complaining if the Blue Jays signed him, but he's not the ideal pick for them to get because, as we mentioned, he's not that high impact guy that we really want them to get. He's not that, Matt Chapman, Jose Ramirez, that type of guy, even still on the market, Carlos Correa, even though that's out of the Blue Jays price point. He's not that type of guy who's going to impact the Blue Jays a lot. So personally, for me, if the Blue Jays signed him, wouldn't have been too much of a fan of the deal, even though he does fit all the Blue Jays needs.
I mean, at the end of the day, this is to some extent, I think you can call him a power hitter because, I mean, 242 home runs since or in his career. So it actually spanned a decade since 2011. Not bad. I mean, he obviously had a couple of years where he hit 30 home runs, 35, I think was 2 years ago, or I know that was this year. Last season in 2020, it was shortened. So obviously not as many, but it wouldn't have been a bad move, I don't think. But if you look at it in the case of if you acquire Kyle Seager, you're not going to get Jose Ramirez, you're not going to get somebody else, then I would say that save the money and sign somebody else. Just because at the end of the day, if you can say you get Jose Ramirez, you trade for him, he is on an expiring contract, so you'd have to work something out there. But if you get him and you can get him for longer, that's probably a better deal for the Blue Jays. And it's not an awful option. I mean, it is a third baseman. It does fit their needs, but considering that there are better options that could be around longer, I think that's something you would have to look at, because who knows? Kyle Seager could have easily delayed his retirement a year or two and stayed with the Blue Jays. I mean, who knows if there was a lot of interest, but say that was the case, you're in the same position in a couple of years, even if you have prospects coming up. And just, I think that the way that this team is built right now, you kind of want to have as much stability as you can for the future. And if you're going to acquire a guy that's probably on the brink of retiring, maybe not the best option, even if he would be a good player for this season. And I know we talk about World Series and how the Blue Jays might just be one piece away from it. I'm not saying Kyle Seager isn't that piece, but I think that there are better pieces out there. Well, eventually will be out there once the lockout ends, but once deals can be made, I think that there would have been better options, just considering that there are maybe higher price points for Jose Ramirez, all those types of guys. But if you can acquire an impact player like that, I wouldn't substitute that for somebody like Kyle Seager. And that's not a disrespect to him. It's just the Blue Jays need a very high impact player. And I think that there are better options available for them.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the potential of Kyle Seager ever coming here, I think it was, and Jacob, you touch on it too, I think it was more of a plan, kind of a fallback plan, and something that would have probably had to be done if they missed out on those top guys that you mentioned. And of course, the top guy in that was somebody like Jose Ramirez. So, a little bit of a surprise, but clearly for Kyle Seager, he came to peace after the Mariners declined his club option for this upcoming year. And after that, it was obviously safe to assume that regardless, he wasn't going to be back with the Seattle Mariners at all, even on a cheaper deal. So it appears that I guess he just wanted to retire a Seattle Mariner, and you can't fault him for that. I mean, 11 solid years in the MLB, and he did really well, as much as 2021 was one of his worst seasons in a while. So it was a tough way for him, I guess, in his last season ever, but overall, a solid career for him. And, he would have been a good option, I think, for the Jays, again, if they missed out on a couple of key pieces. He would have been a pretty good leader. He seems like a good leader in the clubhouse, somebody that you like to be around and everything like that. So Kyle Seager, again, a great career. Something that, we know that the Jays, there wasn't really a report that the Jays were or showed interest. It was more that he would have been a good fit here if, certain plans above him didn't happen. And that would have been a good fallback option, maybe something that you kind of like a last resort or kind of like a last minute move that you decide to go with. So a little bit surprising that he did retire, though. Definitely caught me off guard, even if it wasn't going to be, even if he wasn't going to be back with the Mariners next season. So, that's, I guess, one name you can cross off during a lockout, which is definitely rare because everything's supposed to not happen. But technically a name off the board for the Jays, I guess a potential fit in the infield. But again, at the same time, with this lockout, lots of guys will be available afterwards. So the Jays will be able to get right back at it, even without Kyle Seager being there. But again, great career for him, 11 solid years in the MLB. And for him, he gets to retire a Seattle Mariner. And he gets to say that he played every year of his career with one team. So good for him on that. And again, a little bit of a shock, but that's okay, because we know for a fact that he wasn't a plan A or a plan B for the Jays. So it's not like the top guy on the board is gone. It's just that somebody that they could have potentially fell back on is going to be gone. So that's pretty much where the Jays stand. So I don't really think much changes for them on that point. We all know coming out of the lockout, they will be prioritizing an infielder, maybe a little bit more a starting pitcher as well. So everything on their target board or everything on their board post lockout remains intact, and they still have a lot of options, and they have a lot of potential to improve prior to spring training.
Yeah, I think if you're looking for the biggest impact of this news on the Blue Jays, it might just be the fact that the market now for infielders, for guys on the left side of the infield, is smaller. There's less targets. I know it's only one guy, but it maybe means some team who may have been focusing on getting a replacement level player like Kyle Seager, who, he's better than replacement level. He was worth 2 WAR in 2021, be at an OPS plus of right around league average, exactly league average at 100. So a team that may have been looking at a guy like that, maybe now that Kyle Seager's off the board, they have to go after someone that the Blue Jays might be going after, whether it's Jose Ramirez, like we said, whether that's Matt Chapman with the Athletics. So I think that's maybe the biggest impact of this, is just it makes the market smaller. It makes it so that the Blue Jays if they are trying to target one of these guys, they may have to compete with another team and pay a little bit more in terms of trade assets, in terms of money on the free agent market for these guys. So again, very small news on the Blue Jays side of things, but when it's a lockout and these kind of news things are rare, we got to milk it for all it's worth. Another thing that's happening, and another thing we're going to milk for all it's worth, is the fact that Tyler Chatwood, former Blue Jay great, is moving on to Japan. He signed with the team there this past week. And I just want to go around briefly and discuss our favorite memories of Tyler Chatwood as a Blue Jay, because I know we cherish them near and dear to our hearts. He had a lot of great moments in a Blue Jay uniform that we smile when we think of. And maybe the only moment that we actually smile when we think of Tyler Chatwood is the moment that the Blue Jays got rid of him. But nonetheless, I want to go around and talk about our favorite moments of Tyler Chatwood as a Blue Jay. I guess I can start. I think it's his blown save in, I guess it was at Fenway Park in June, I think it was. It was a game that I was at, so that's why it is near and dear to my heart. But he came in, the Blue Jays were winning 5-3 at that point, I think. I think he walked two batters, hit a batter, and threw a wild pitch, and came out of the game. So that was one example of a sterling effort from Tyler Chatwood. But Jacob, Bryson, what are some of your guys' favorite memories of Chatwood now that he is moving on from Major League Baseball?
Well, I just want to briefly mention, not a single run from that game in Boston was actually charged to Tyler Chatwood. They were all charged to Ross Stripling. And I was actually going to pick that, but I don't want to completely copy you. But the fact that those runs were not even charged to him just made that hilarious to me. Hilarious in like a unfortunate way, but you get the point. But I think the number one bad moment, but also favorite moment, I think you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. The game in Cleveland where maybe it's not entirely Tyler Chatwood's fault. He should have been pulled. Blame that a little bit on the manager, but how do you walk, what was it, 5 straight batters? Like, Mark, you talk about you want to run every day. This guy, he did that for you just on the field, like the walks and the runs charged to him. Like it was absolutely brutal to watch. And they were winning that game. Yeah, they were winning at the time. It was a doubleheader, so they had 2 less innings to play. And this guy, he comes in and he just blows the save, just completely blows the game. And it came at a bit of a shock because I believe that was one of the first appearances where he started to start slacking, and his ERA started to inflate a little bit. But that was really shocking because his ERA was under 1. It was like 0.58 for the first 6 weeks of the season, and then out of nowhere this stuff just happens, and that just has to be the absolute epitome of the Blue Jays season. It was almost there. They almost were good enough, and then it unfortunately with Tyler Chatwood, it's not what it didn't go the way that we wanted to. And that game, it's near and dear to my heart in a bad way. But you talk about how this team was 1 win away from qualifying for the playoffs. You're 1 less walk away from that, and to me, that it has to be my favorite moment. But the one thing I will say, like the Tyler Chatwood slander, it's kind of funny and all, but I do wish him the best. I do hope he can at least turn his career around, but it's not going to be with the Blue Jays. And unfortunately, because of what we're discussing, is to some extent for good reason.
And it won't be in the MLB either. But for Tyler Chatwood, yeah, I mean, you guys kind of highlighted the key dates. May 30th was that Cleveland game where he walked 5. He gave up 2 earned runs in an inning and a third. His very next appearance that came on June 4th against the Houston Astros, didn't record a single out, gave up 6 hits, 5 earned runs. One of that was a home run as well. So that was his very next outing. You'd figure he'd want to bounce back. Best part about baseball is you get to play every day. You get to redeem yourself. That didn't happen. And another game you could look back on and say, maybe that's why the Jays didn't make the playoffs, because of June 4th against the Houston Astros, June 25th against the Baltimore Orioles. 1 out recorded, 3 earned runs in that span. There's another one right there. And then I think Canada Day was the finale for Tyler Chatwood before he went on the IL, and then he was later DFA'd. So 0.2 innings. So he got 2 outs, 2 earned runs in that span with 2 walks. That was his last appearance as a member of the Blue Jays. But my favorite moment of Tyler Chatwood, even though I guess this wasn't him as a part of the Blue Jays organization, it was just still kind of funny to see from, I guess, social media, or kind of seeing the box score in that game, was August 18th when he was a member of the San Francisco Giants, his very first appearance. He comes out of the bullpen, pitches 2 innings, gives up 5 runs in that span, 3 earned runs. And that for me was probably my favorite moment, because it was good to know that it wasn't a Blue Jays curse, because a lot of people believe that might be a thing for certain people. He went out for the San Francisco Giants, who were almost, I think, 100-win team in 2021. He also blew his first appearance to the New York Mets on that date. So that's probably my favorite moment, just to know that it wasn't just the Jays that he was a disaster with, unlike somebody like Brad Hand, because we know that for some reason, ever since he put on a Jays uniform, and he completely turned into one of the worst pitchers that they've, I guess, in the franchise in terms of ERA and whatnot, and in at least in some certain memory. So that's probably my favorite moment, was August 18th, his first appearance, but he was a member of the San Francisco Giants.
I'm surprised none of you went with his appearance against the Tampa Bay Rays, when I guess it was him and was it Travis Bergen who came in and walked a bunch of guys. That was up there on my favorite list of
May
Tyler
23rd.
Chatwood, but May 23rd. There you go. I think that was pretty much like his first kind of catastrophic outing, and everything, like you said, it snowballed from there. The May 30 outing against Cleveland, and then heading into Houston, and then going to Boston, and yeah, just not a good time for Tyler Chatwood. But all joking aside, we do wish him the best in Japan, and you never know. It's always possible he goes to Japan, figures it out for a couple years, comes back to Major League Baseball. We've seen other players have success. Bryson, you look terrified at that prospect, but we've seen other players have success doing that. Eric Thames is the first guy who comes to mind. Went over to Japan, had success, came back, had success. Jacob, you're typing Rafael Dolis. That's another name that maybe Blue Jay fans won't be happy to hear. A similar type of career path, but yeah, it's always possible he comes back, and we do wish him the best of luck. And all joking aside, he does have the potential to be a good pitcher, and we saw that at the start of 2021, where he went on a stretch of 10-15 outings where he was lights out for the Blue Jays, and he became one of those guys who's in that circle of trust for however short a time before he kind of imploded in Cleveland and in against Tampa Bay and in Houston. So we'll see. We wish him the best of luck. We now turn to, I guess, the big conversation for today, which is Charlie Montoyo. And no, Montoyo has not done anything to make any headlines, but he is actually entering the last year of his 3-year contract. The Blue Jays brought him on board in 2019. Played 2019, 2020, 2021. Blue Jays picked up an option that he had for 2022, but that's his last season that he's under contract for with the Blue Jays. I guess just to start off with, before we get to the conversation of whether the Blue Jays should give him an extension, let's look back at the past 3 years and evaluate the job that Charlie Montoyo has done, because there's always talk about Montoyo and his on-field decisions and criticism of all that stuff. But you look back at the past 3 years, and 2019, you can excuse that, first year in the majors. He doesn't have a good team. The Blue Jays are not good in 2019. 2020, they start to be good. He starts to get criticism for his on-field decisions. The Blue Jays do make the playoffs, but it's an expanded playoffs. And then 2021, we all know the story of that year. The Blue Jays are a very good team. Again, he does get criticism for his on-field decisions. Most of it, in my opinion, can be excused as bad bullpen arms, period, not bad bullpen management. But then we go into 2022 looking at this contract. So how are you guys so far, as kind of a status check-in, viewing Charlie Montoyo's tenure as Blue Jays manager and the job he's done so far?
So I'm not saying that correlation automatically equals causation, but the vast majority of the criticism that I've seen for Montoyo occurs when the team is not playing well. And I mean, when they're unable to play well. And I think I mentioned this maybe towards the end of the season. And I said, look at the lack of criticism that we've seen for Charlie Montoyo since the team has gotten good. So maybe since the All-Star break or the trade deadline when they acquired Barrios and all those guys. I think that says something to some extent. There were definitely decisions. You go back to 2020, some of those moves where he told a guy to run to third or to try and steal home or steal third, do things. And mismanaging the bullpen that absolutely baffle my mind. But I don't think that he's a bad manager. I'll be honest. I really don't. And I think he deserves to stay here at least for another season. He does come back from 2023 or 2022, excuse me. And then I think you come back for 2023, exercise that option, reevaluate after that. I don't think he's worthy of an extension right now, but I'm not willing to say go look for a new manager because, as you said with 2019, I think you can excuse that. He was relatively a rookie manager at that point. He had never managed in the majors. I don't think that means you still can make mistakes, but I'm saying it's understandable and it's kind of expected. But that team was also bad. Like even even from a fan's perspective, like it was not good standings wise, and you can't necessarily say that that's the manager's fault. 2020, same thing. I still think that if it was a full year, there'd be a lot of growing pains, but still the team was able to rally back. And then 2021, when you have two guys in your starting rotation and you have more pitchers on your injured list than you do in your bullpen, that's not your manager's fault. And yeah, you can still put the wrong guy in at the wrong time, but I don't think that you can fully blame Montoyo for all these things. And so that's why I do think that he's deserving of staying for another couple seasons. At least give him those two. If he still doesn't do as well, yeah, that might hurt the team. I'm sure it would. But I think the prospect of him being a good manager and getting better probably outweighs the risk of really him not being a better manager. And one of the things that we're forgetting is he's not just the guy that makes decisions. He's also the leader of that clubhouse. And he's been here. He went to 3 different cities with the team this season or last season, was there with them in Dunedin and Buffalo in 2020. He's been here really since the rebuild started. And I don't think that that's fair to say, we can nitpick a few little things, you're gone. I think it still does make some sense to keep him around. I know that there's a lot of people that want him gone. I remember one game that I had gone to, they had lost, and it wasn't even Montoyo's fault. Like they lost, they lost to Baltimore, but I think Ryu gave up like 5 runs in a single inning. And there was a fire Montoyo chant outside of the stadium. And I just remember, like, I didn't say anything. I'm not going to get involved, but that type of stuff just hurts my brain really, to think that people still blame Montoyo for the losses. But regardless, I think if you can look at this from a unbiased perspective or as neutral of a perspective as you can really, even though I am a fan, Montoyo does have work to do, but I think he deserves to stay, at least to prove himself, and at least to say that, what we did in 2021, that's not finished. I know the standings are a little weird in the way it goes, but you can have a better season. You go into 2022 with a full rotation, a good bullpen, you have a star-studded infield and outfield. I think that Montoyo can handle this team, and I think he's capable of doing so, really. Yeah, injuries are going to mess with you, and there's a lot of different things that happen throughout the season, but I don't think that it's fair to say Montoyo doesn't deserve at least another season or two to prove himself.
Yeah, you know what? I think my overall evaluation of Charlie Montoyo as well, I'm a little bit more in favor of him than you are, Jacob. I'm more closer to that conversation of a long-term deal. I just look at it from a lot of different perspectives, and I understand the criticism he does get, but all 3 of us had many discussions about these bullpen games last year, and we did. And pretty much outside of a few specific games, going back to Tyler Chatwood, that May 30th game was one of those games where we full out blamed Charlie Montoyo for the bullpen management. But majority of the other situations that we spoke of, none of us blamed him really for most of it, because of if you look at the bullpen at the beginning of 2021, you can see the problems that it did have. You can see how weak it was on paper, and understandably so. I mean, there was only so much that Charlie Montoyo could have done. I mean, I don't know what people were looking for other than a scapegoat to blame somebody, because that's how it works in sports. It's always somebody's fault when the team is failing, and in this case, Charlie Montoyo is an easy target for that. A lot of Blue Jays fans, I guess at the time when he came in, were kind of it took them a while to move on from somebody like John Gibbons, because as much as he was criticized a lot too, he was more of a fan favorite at the time. And I think that Charlie Montoyo stepping in kind of, tainted his image a little bit because of that. And I think it was kind of unfair. And it's the same thing goes with Alex Anthopoulos and the way Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins came in here. A lot of fans kind of were against the change, against the shift, I guess, in leadership in the organization. And all of a sudden, after a couple of years of Shapiro and Atkins buying on the free agent market, all of a sudden they are now deemed as, heroes in the city for the team that they put together. So maybe Charlie Montoyo will eventually reach that territory, but entering this year alone, I think it'll be an even bigger test for him because of how Jacob closed his point off. The bullpen itself, the team itself is much better at the beginning of the year than it was in 2021. So if these, I guess, occurrences happen this year as well, assuming that, certain relievers don't have a down year, I'm assuming that everyone pitches well. And, if there's games that happen the same way that 2021 happened, then I think criticism for Charlie Montoyo will definitely go up. However, with the roster that they've built this year, or at least heading into this year, and they're probably going to add a few more also eventually, pieces to their bullpen, maybe a little bit more. They did add Yimi Garcia before the lockout, so he's one guy that was added, but there might be a few more on the way. This is a much better bullpen coming into this year. And for the fact that Charlie Montoyo is well liked in the clubhouse and well received without the organization, nobody can take away the fact of how good of a leader he is, regardless if you agree with his decisions or not. This is a different point now of how he is as a person, how he is in the clubhouse. You talk about the challenges that this team has been through since 2020, pretty much being away from Toronto until July 30th of this year. He kept the team together. He kept things going. After 2019, they almost lost 100 games. That's pretty much what it was, 67-95. Anybody could have managed that team and pretty much have the same record as him. So that's a complete write-off for me. 2020, however, they finished 32-28 in 60 games. That's obviously a massive turnaround, kind of exceeding expectations that we all had about this team, because we felt like it would have definitely been a step forward. But a playoff appearance is not what we expected. And this was before the announcement of Jacob's famous expanded playoffs format that he loved. But of course, entering 2021, the expectations even rose even more. But for some reason, Charlie Montoyo continued to get a lot of criticism. And I just think a lot of it, unfortunately, and most of it was unfair. I just look at the leader he was as well, keeping this team together throughout the years of them being away from Toronto and kind of holding them intact. And even at the point before they came home, the team was pretty much hovering around 500 at the time they did come home. And a lot of people thought those final 2 months were it was just kind of going to be more like a celebration that the Jays were back. And the fact that, them contending for a playoff spot didn't seem realistic, but this team ran the table when they came home. They went on their playoff push, even though they fell short by one game, they got that close to getting in. And, minus a few hiccups they had in that span, they were pretty much winning ball games left, right, and center. And that's why it was so easy for that team to crack at that point in the season. Because when a lot of failure happens, especially in baseball around that summer, the early summer mark, and that's where the Jays were at. They're hovering around 500 and they're having games that they lost because of the bullpen. It could have been so easy for this team to fall apart in shambles and kind of just never regain their rhythm. But that was the complete opposite. And if you can't, praise Charlie Montoyo or give Charlie Montoyo some credit for that, I think that's unfair, because I think he definitely deserves a lot of credit for turning this team around and pretty much what they did. As much as them coming home was definitely a push to everyone, but it was just, I think, a lot of unfair criticism for him. So if you're going to ask me the question about a long-term deal, or if that's what Mark will be asking eventually, I do think after 2022, if everything, again, barring any last minute, failures that happen this year, if he's mismanaging the bullpen again with this type of bullpen, I think we'll have a different conversation next year. But if everything goes to plan, and if he kind of approaches this year, and of course he's going to improve himself, and of course there's little things that he will improve and he has to learn from, and no one's denying that, because nobody's perfect, especially Charlie Montoyo. But if he handles the bullpen the way he did, I think at the end of 2021 and pretty much for the entire year, and the Jays, expected to make the playoffs, expected to win at least 90 games, how do you not give him a long-term deal? I mean, I don't see how you don't, if that's the case. Again, barring any failure of a season, which we don't want to talk about, but of course you can't rule out that slim possibility. There's no other reason for me not to believe that he doesn't deserve a long-term deal. So for me, the evaluation and kind of the analysis that I have of Charlie Montoyo ever since stepping in, I think he came in on tough circumstances, again, managing a team that almost lost 100 games, but he deserves some of that credit, and a lot of that credit, for turning the team around in 2020, 2021, pretty much being borderline playoff contenders last year. And he deserves credit for that. And this year alone, they're supposed to be even better. So not giving a manager a long-term deal, winning at least 90 games, I'm not sure what the expectation level is for that. But I think if everything goes to plan, there's no reason why he's not eligible or why he doesn't deserve a long-term deal.
Yeah, I think 2022 will be a big deciding factor for the Blue Jays and Montoyo. Not that like right now, I can't see them parting ways with Charlie Montoyo when, or any manager for that matter, for on any major league team when they have such good control of the clubhouse and the clubhouse is in such a good state. I can't see any team willingly moving on from someone who has done such a good job in that regard. So keeping that in mind, I think 2022 will be a big deciding factor because the expectations are so high for the Blue Jays. I think, we're a couple weeks / months away from our prediction episode, but I think we're all going to be around 95, 97 wins. The expectations are high for the Blue Jays, and Jacob indicating that he's going even higher than that. The expectations are high for the Blue Jays. So 2022 is going to be a big year for them and Charlie Montoyo. If Charlie Montoyo comes out and he has management of the bullpen, like you're saying, Bryson, he manages everything perfectly, without a doubt, they're keeping him around for 2023 and beyond. But if he comes out and they do have the same struggles with a better team that they had in 2021, that's when you open up the question and say, maybe it's time to move on. Maybe it's time to shop the market. We are a contending team. We're a team that everyone wants to be a part of. Let's see the best manager that we can get on the open market. But again, until some sort of collapse happens, until he loses control of the clubhouse, until this team is not as close as it once was, I just don't see the Blue Jays parting ways with someone who has been such a key part of them since 2019, since Vladdy came up, since Bo Bichette came up, since almost Kevin Biggio came up, since almost Danny Jansen came up. All these guys who are such a key part of this team know Charlie Montoyo. They've worked with him. They've had success with him. I don't see the Blue Jays moving on from someone like that unless something drastic happens in 2022. That something drastic, I think, could be someone else coming onto the market. I think, Charlie Montoyo is this perfect guy that the Blue Jays front office likes, but I think there are top of the line managers that only come around once in a while that the Blue Jays might be interested in, whether that's someone like Alex Cora. I don't think he's leaving Boston anytime soon, but that's one of those guys that come to mind, whether it's someone like Bob Melvin. I don't think he's leaving San Diego anytime soon, but that's another guy who's one of those top of the line managers. Some of those guys, I could see the Blue Jays, if an opportunity presented itself, I could see the Blue Jays moving on from someone like Charlie Montoyo, just because those guys are in a whole nother level. But for right now, I mean, this guy has the keys to the team as long as he wants it, barring anything dramatic. Again, I think I've brought up this example before, but when I think of Charlie Montoyo and I think of how close this team was, it's, for me, the first thing that pops into my mind is the All-Star game this year when everyone else disappeared basically, and Blue Jays players, once they were removed from the game, they stayed in the dugout to watch the game. And after the game, when Vladdy won the Most Valuable Player award for the All-Star game, all the players who were at the All-Star game for the Blue Jays, Marcus Semien, Bo Bichette, and Teoscar Hernandez, they all came out on the field and watched the award ceremony for Vladdy and then celebrated with him on the field after the fact. So obviously not all of that is Charlie Montoyo. Part of that is just the players on the team and the chemistry they have. But the chemistry and the attitude starts with the leader, and the leader is Charlie Montoyo. So I fully approve of what he's doing. So the next question, I guess, is how long do you want him to stick around? And that's a more complicated question. And to answer the question of when the Blue Jays should offer this extension is also a more complicated question, because I think personally, you have to see part of 2022 to make that decision. Like right now, like I just said, you can be pretty certain with what you have in Charlie Montoyo and pretty confident in who he is as a manager. But to me, you still want to see, with the expectations being so high for 2022, what he has to offer in at least the first few months of the season. So I think once it gets to June, July, and he is checking all the boxes, as I anticipate he will, I think that's a point where the Blue Jays go, okay, 3 years, 4-year deal, 5-year deal to be manager of this team long-term. That's what I would like to see the Blue Jays take as an approach to sign Charlie Montoyo long-term. Where do you guys stand as to when the Blue Jays should make this extension or make this decision, and how long it should be if they should.
See, the way I'm looking at it, and I was going to mention this earlier, but I guess it fits better here. I think that the the Blue Jays trust Montoyo, the players trust him, the front office trusts him. They know he can make the right decision when the situation is good. Like you can choose a closer, obviously, when you have a guy that has lights out stuff. But I think that the team will know that he's the guy that will stay here when he proves that he can manage the team when it's kind of in shambles. So we mentioned last year how obviously Tyler Chatwood started off extremely well, fell off the face of the earth, and that was mismanaged. Say going into 2022, I don't want to say any names, but you don't want to speak anything into existence, but say somebody that was key for this team, the submarine guy, I'm just going to put that out. Say he has a down season. Does Charlie Montoyo still trust him? Does he do something? I don't know, send him to the minors, or, how does he handle something like that? If you have something unexpected and Montoyo is able to manage that, or maybe not put somebody in high leverage situations when they prove they can't, what does he do there? That's I think what I'm looking for is how does he manage these types of situations? And if he can prove he can, I think maybe this is a bit longer, but I say you keep him around until management shifts. And when I say management, I mean the front office. So, Shapiro and Atkins are here for another, I think, what is it, like 5 or plus years? They're here for a while. I don't see why you don't take him out, or why you don't replace him, or why you replace him while the management is still here, because obviously they all like each other. They've been here. The Shapiro and Atkins took over when John Gibbons was still the manager, but the reason why they switched him wasn't necessarily because he was a bad manager, which I actually thought he was a good manager for a variety of different reasons. That Montoyo's, he's a different person, so whatever. But the reason why they switched him was because this was a different team. Like it was rebuilding. It was kind of a turnover of the roster. And if the roster's the same, relatively speaking, with obviously some differences, but if it's mostly the same group, I don't see why you get rid of him. I say you keep him around maybe until, I would say, the next 5 years, as long as he's able to prove that he's capable of it, just until Shapiro and Atkins leave. Now, the one thing that does make it difficult, and we've seen this over the last 3-ish plus years, is a lot of players are signing decade-long extensions. And so when I said you have him kind of with this group of players, obviously you're not going to have him until he's in his 70s or 80s if Guerrero signs a 15-year extension. But I think if you can keep him around for the 5 years, get through this competitive schedule, as long as he can prove that he's capable of handling it, I think that's the perfect decision. And you don't want to be going through new managers every couple seasons. You know what I mean? Like it's not like the bullpen where it's as expendable as really as you make of it, and it can change each year. You want to keep your manager, you want to keep him consistent, and only replace him if you absolutely have to. And I think if Montoyo proves that he can manage the team through the adversity and the benefit, or the good times of this team, I don't see why you get rid of him until, it is 2022 right now. I say 2027, maybe, if he signs a 5-year, or 2028 if he signs an extension, something like that.
I'll tell you one thing, and I'll say it again, because I know that for sure there are some people who are listening who do not like Charlie Montoyo. It is very bold and very uncharacteristic. I don't think it's really even happened before, other than maybe like a mutual way of parting ways, but there's never been a managerial change for a team that's won at least 90 games. Again, unless it's some sort of retirement or anything like that, you don't see that. So I don't know how you do that. And Jacob, going back to your point of him possibly seeing how he'll handle maybe some sort of adversity in 2022, I think he's kind of I think he's peaked at that. Like, I think everything that he's dealt with is the worst he will deal with. Again, that 2019 team, he had to deal with people like Clay Buchholz and Wilmer Font in his starting rotation. He had to deal with someone like Edwin Jackson, who's been on 20 teams, and he made 8 appearances for this team at an ERA of 11. Like, he had to deal with a lot of old names we haven't heard of people in a while. But if you just look at that 2019 roster and that bullpen in particular, it is a mess. And especially in 2020, he did, a better job. Again, the team wasn't as good as it was last year, but again, it's a step forward. Nothing could be as worse as what he dealt with in 2019. And in 2021, dealing with people like, Tyler Chatwood and Rafael Dolis, who was one of their key players the year before, that's a lot of adversity, in my opinion, for what he had to deal with, because that is something that was not expected entering the year, because they came into 2021 alone expected to have bigger roles than what they did the year before. And all of them pretty much, or at least Elise in particular, and somebody like Chatwood, who they brought in, completely fell off a cliff. And then you're looking throughout the rest of the bullpen during that time in the season, and you're wondering who the heck is going to come in. And, you had people like Anthony Castro coming in for saves, and that didn't last really that long either. So I think that the fact that the bullpen itself on paper entering this year looks a lot better. I'd be very surprised if anything got to, a certain level of what it did in 2020 and 2021 and 2020. Now, for a contract approach, I think the thing with this, and I agree with you, Mark, because I do think we have to see how it looks like in 2022, because the whole base of this initial contract that he signed to be here, it was kind of like a wait and see approach. I think the part that kind of makes that obvious is that he had a club option for this year. And, for a rookie manager having to sign a club option, that's definitely a little bit of pressure. And that's something that you don't really want to, that could either go either way. And it's pretty much up to the team. It's nothing and it's completely out of your control if you're going to be back or not. So the fact that they exercised that, I think it was right at the beginning of the year when it might have even been during spring training last year, but they did it early on in the season, guaranteeing that he would be back next year. I think in this case, I think you do have to see a little bit of how he handles things. And again, he's going to have a lot more weapons to use from the bullpen that are going to be more effective. And what I'm trying to say is, as much as we don't criticize him as much as other fans do, especially from last year, he's definitely going to have a little bit more pressure, because the amount of, you can look on the bullpen and see, a lot of it, like, what do you want him to do? But in this case, in 2022, if everything goes according to plan with certain pitchers, you can only blame him for so much in this case. So that's why I think the excuses are going to start slowly running out of, reasons to kind of give or not blame him for everything. And that's why I think, though, for him in particular, he is going to do a better job because he's going to have better players. So I think if he proves that as well to not even just the management, but to the fans as well, to kind of slowly earn their trust in some sort of way, I do think at some point throughout the year, he will get a long-term deal or an offer. But I do think it will be at least 3 to 5 years. I agree with Jacob, and maybe 5 years being the highest they'll go. And we never really see teams break the bank for a manager. So it's not like we're going to see like a decade-long deal like Jacob was talking about for people like Vladdy, but which makes sense, obviously, for him. But I think, anywhere in that range from 3 to 5 years is what we'll see. And a lot of it has a lot to do with what Mark Shapiro's contract and Ross Atkins' contract are too, because you have to assume that they're all going to be kind of on similar timelines, because that's usually how it happens in terms of an entire regime. I don't think Ross Atkins' new deal is actually I don't think we really know how long he's going to be here for. I think that was kind of unknown when it was announced at some point last year, a couple of years ago, but we know Mark Shapiro signed for 5 years. So I assume it's going to be around that 4 to 5 year range if he does get it, barring any last minute meltdowns or kind of failures that we're not expecting or we don't anticipate to happen. I think it'll be around 4 to 5 years. If all goes according to plan, if everything stays the course, he'll be here long term, and he's going to match up with, again, the Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins regime, because it only makes sense, especially that he would be fresh off his rookie contract as a manager. He's proven himself to the organization, so he does deserve to be there, I think, as long as people like Shapiro and Atkins are planning to be here for him.
Boy, Clay Buchholz and Edwin Jackson.
Wilmer
Those are
Font.
some throwback names. And Wilmer Font, yeah. Those are some throwbacks. I remember those Edwin Jackson starts. Dark days in Blue Jay history. But yeah, if you can manage through that, if you can manage through COVID and not playing in your home ballpark for 600 plus days and all the things that the Blue Jays went through in 2021, having it be one of the wildest years in recent memory for Blue Jays, if you can manage through all that, I think you're right that he has already kind of hit rock bottom in a sense of team morale, of tough adversity that you're going to have to go through. And he's come out on the other side of it with a team that is closer than ever, stronger than ever. So at the risk of repeating ourselves, yeah, I think he's been through those challenges, but I think the one challenge he hasn't been through is managing a team with expectations as high as the 2022 Blue Jays will be. So that's the one test he hasn't passed yet, and I'd like to see him pass that before the Blue Jays extend him. But one question, and this is just a quick response from you guys. The Blue Jays have nothing else to do right now. The Blue Jays can't talk to players about signing them. They can't talk to other teams about trading for players. because they have nothing else to do, you think it's possible that they're working at an extension with Montoyo right now in this offseason during the lockout because they have nothing else to do?
Well, if you wanted a couple months to negotiate, and now you have it. So, I mean, I'm going to say they probably are. I mean, at least internally, maybe not with Montoyo. Maybe it's Atkins and Chaparro talking, but eventually it would obviously go to Montoyo. But I wouldn't be surprised if there is some type of discussions with respect to what do we do with this guy. He's eventually we're going to have to either re-sign or replace. So might as well consider it now.
I do feel like maybe there's preliminary discussions. I think that's the word that Ross Atkins loves to use. So maybe, and I still would be very surprised if it got, well, I wouldn't say very, I say probably a little bit surprised if it did get done before the lockout. But I will say this, if it did happen within the next few weeks or pretty much the stretch of this lockout, I also wouldn't be mad or I wouldn't be against it. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's maybe earlier preliminary discussions.
It would give us something to talk about, that's for sure. I would not complain if the Blue Jays just periodically next week, they extend Charlie Montoyo. A week after that, Pete Walker. Week after that, they announced the Rogers Center renovations. Just one thing every week that we can talk about would be wonderful. But that's pretty much everything we have to talk about for this week. So as always, you can support our podcast by going to patreon.com/section138pod. You can check out our podcast on iTunes and Spotify, where you can rate and review us, which again just helps spread the word about what we're doing. It helps get our podcast in front of new faces, which is always awesome. If you listen to our podcast on those platforms or other platforms, you can find it on YouTube and watch all of our reactions to all of the stupid things that other people are saying. And then if you watch it on YouTube, you can always listen to it on other platforms. So we'll be back next week with hopefully something to talk about. We'll catch you then.
All eyes on the mound and the bearded Sam Dyson. Now he comes set. Kicks the 1-1 pitch. Fly ball deep left field. Yes, sir. There she